Bonjour and welcome to the second day of More Than Planet Symposium Ocean, Space, Ocean. Today, after a short introduction by Marco Pellian, Elena Sirkovic will give the keynote speech, followed by Xavier Four, who will introduce us to Planet Laboratoire. There will be a 10-minute coffee break from 3:15. Well, a little bit later than that probably because we are already running late, but we'll adjust. And during the second half of the afternoon, Nicolas Maigret and Baruch Gottlieb will be presenting about this innovation, John Palmesino for Territorial Agency, and Federico Foncamore for Space for Good. From a little bit after 5, we will conclude with the symposium with a panel discussion with all our guests. After each presentation, you will have a few minutes to ask the burning question you might have directly related with what has just been said. For more general and discussion-related questions, I will ask you to wait for the panel discussion. Thank you. And now the introduction by Marco.
Thank you. Good afternoon, everybody. I will try to be really short with this introduction since we will hear really a lot of speakers, and we already introduced partially the project yesterday or quite extensively. And as you can see, More Than Planet is really conceived as a landscape of imagination and Imagineering. Of course, there are really a lot of technological tools that are providing the data for that Imagineering, but in the end, the most important outcome of all of these processes, in our opinion, is the establishment of a solid discourse on the planetary futures and the commons. Yeah. So I think we can all agree on this. Several organizations got together for establishing this platform, and I have a feeling from all of our discussions and what we have seen so far in the framework of the project that this is going to be a much longer term endeavor than just this one moment in time in a few years. Because the discourses that the project is opening, the platform is opening, are extremely, timely, critical, and also at this point in time, we also are equipped, as we will see also today from our speakers, with quite an extensive set of knowledge and knowledges directly involved in understanding the complexities of planetary systems. Yesterday we heard about the geobiological, let's call it, connections of planetary systems on one level, but we all understand, today we will hear about social, biological connections of planetary systems also, besides other things. But what is really important is that there hasn't been a time like ours up to now in the last, let's say, 60 to 80 years, where we have at the disposal a really giant amount of daily data that is coming from all kinds of sensors, both sensors in space, sensors on Earth, as well as all kinds of numerical models that are bringing the understanding of planetary systems forward. And of course, they produce enormous amounts of data, and this data not only needs to be interpreted, it needs to be also understood, distributed, made available as commons, really. And this is the big gap. So today we will again hear about, from different practices from more legal points of view, I assume, with Elena Sirkovic, to much more, of course, things that are concerned with direct access to remote sensing and interpretation, as well as we will look at some practices that have been ongoing, like the Laboratory Planet project, which of course started collecting data, connections, mapping, charting them already, in 20 years ago. And I think that it's fantastic that all of this. It is fantastic that all of these things are somehow coming together in this platform, and I foresee really an exciting future. Of course, keeping in mind always that we live also in very, very dangerous times. Probably after the Second World War globally, the most difficult period, and that needs to be also reflected also in this context. Yeah, because of course there is a way out. There is an exit to understanding where we stand as humans and as planet. We can also be very cynical, and we all understand that one day it's all going to be over. Yeah, we quite firmly understand that part. So we really need to, and hopefully it's going to be a cosmic end game, not self-inflicted. But it's the understanding is there, the data is available, and the big question is, what will the future generations really say about this time where we had all of the data and knowledge at our disposal and we could not act as a civilization to kind of bring us to another level. On the positive side, we are doing exactly this with these kind of platforms and the practices we have seen yesterday, and we will hear from today. So I'm very excited to open this second day of our symposium. There's a lot to come in the Modern Planet. You can check the website. There's actually so much happening. It's overwhelming in a way. By the way, we are already listed as a past event. So fast does Modern Planet move forward that on the website today has happened. Yeah, I hope we'll have a very interesting and let's call it productive afternoon. Thank you.
Thank you, Marco. So we are moving to our next guest, Xavier Four. Xavier Four from Bureau d'Etudes is now going to introduce us to the newspaper, the Laboratory Planet, or Planète Laboratoire, as we say in French. Xavier Four, you are a co-founder and member of Bureau d'Etudes with Léonore Bonaccini. Created in 2000, the group of artists and designers Bureau d'Etudes has developed different methods of mapping networks and systems. These mappings, some of which have been distributed in about 30 countries, have led to investigation workshops on the French agri-food system or on biocontrol. Bureau d'Etudes has also implemented public action design approaches with Théâtre Évolutif, Territoire École, Zoo Jeux, and in a rural territory in which Bureau d'Etudes has settled in 2007. Xavier.
Then I want to speak about a quite old project, but it's not clear how much it's old, and it's also a point about what I want to speak. It's this project, La Planète Laboratoire, the Laboratory Planet, as one part of the mode of production where we are now. Where is Laboratory Planet now? Then I put a timeline here with the population. And when we begin Laboratory Planet, it's here, where you have 6 billion and a half inhabitants on Earth. And since this time, in 2007, you have 1 billion more. And then you have different mode of production. And usually when we see this kind of line, we think that we are in this point, and that it's the present. And it's also a part of the question is, if we are effectively in this part, and if we are in a linear structure of time. And that, I think, it's an important point. Mostly, it's also the question, is a laboratory planet the actual mode of production, or is it also an old mode of production? Then there is this question how much it's an old object. You see, we make this newspaper, 2007. It seems that it's an other century. And in this newspaper, we make that the first copies of this newspaper begin in 1945 as the birthday of the laboratory planet, because you have the atomic bomb, and we decide to focus on this date as the beginning of this new mode of production. And but it's not so easy to say that it's the beginning, because if we take this date of Hiroshima, the lifetime of uranium-235 is 700 millions of years. Then the beginning, it's a very, very long time. Another aspect is when we begin to make the laboratory planet, it was during the second Iraq War, and this second Iraq War was during the hegemony of the United States, and in a way we are in the end of this hegemony, and we are in a new time, in a way, in the beginning of a new time. Then the laboratory planet, it was not just an American project. You have, it's clear, you have this atomic bomb project as the birthday of the laboratory planet, but and in this way it was American, but since this time it's become, yes, a planet project. Yeah, I just put that with this problem of the linear structure of time. When we speak about the mode of production, we think usually that ourselves, we are in Europe, we are in the top of the line. We are the urban, and you have a billion of people who are just outside. They are like in the past. And because they are farmers, for example. And the point is also to see that this laboratory planet, it is not just the project from the cities where you have the urban population with eco-anxiety, and the question of technologies with this linear time from factory to laboratory, and from the animals to the robot. But the point is also to watch that together, and not just to say that a part of the population, it's the future in a way, and another part is the past. And the point is to think how much hold this part of reality, of the actual reality, have in the same time and produce together the same planet. For example, when we see this common graphics, you have this division between rural and urban, and when we speak about the climate change and the heat of the planet is mostly an urban question, and then about which kind of population we speak. And when we see that, we see that we cross two lines, the rural population and urban population, as two human projects. But it's clear that you have 3 billion people who are in the countryside, and it's also a part of the laboratory planet, but maybe in a completely another way than you have in the urban population. Then it's an introduction. After, the point is, when we speak about the mode of production of the laboratory planet, as you have a couple, you have factory planet and laboratory planet. The factory planet is very clear, it's a capitalism since the 17th century. And yes, now you have the engineer part and scientific part with the laboratory planet, and you have a structure like that with a physical layer. And in the newspaper, we made different inquiries about these different layers. You have these physical layers with chemical technologies and electromagnetic technologies, with the question of solar system ecology. And here you have the bio layer, and with climate technologies and biotechnologies, and psychic layer for technologies, psychotechnologies, and spiritual layer with the spiritual machines. And the point is that it's different layers of this laboratory, and you have evidently different connection between these different layers, but it's quite interesting to watch the difference between these layers. Here, for example, we make some, in this newspaper, investigation about specific objects like Internet of Organisms or Internet of Things. And it's clear that for each layer, you have different companies and different organs. And in the newspaper, the point was to think about how we can watch this structure with these different layers. Mostly here you have small maps about the radar. For example, you have a global infrastructure about that with info technologies, and it's a component of this mode of production. Then Laboratory Planet was, and here's an investigation about the technologies as ontological forces, and how these ontological forces change the ways we produce societies, and are new actors in politics. You have in these technological actors the capitalism and the capital as an automaton. And you have also that new force that it's not just a state or empires, but you have a huge different kind of new force who appears in the laboratory planet. And the first copies we do is how we work in this system, and we are the obsolete objects of this reality. Okay, then at the beginning we have this question of the secret as a huge force of this technology since 1945, because as we put in the first copy, the system of research, military research and industrial research and scientific research have a huge amount of secret documents, and it's quite very difficult to make an evaluation of the reality of the laboratory planet, and that it was our first interrogation. Part of this first interrogation is how we can live in a world where we don't understand really what is the reality of the system. And that it was the first copy, and then after we continue with this question of, yes, of the computer, with this question of invisible technologies, and the last copy was about the alien capitalism. I mean by that we don't know why we have we create. It's not clear what we mean by we. A situation, a planet where we cannot live, maybe in one century, and what is actors of that? And that it was the last copy of that. It's the situation about the xenopolitics and how the aliens hunters in this situation, and what is this alien to create a situation where we cannot live. Okay. Then I stop.
Thank you, Xavier. Is there a new laboratory, Planet Cooking?
We have a project, yes, to make a new copy. It is not very clear about what we can think today, because the actual time is quite very obscure, and it's not easy to know what is interesting to do.
Oh, it's a mystery subject. A mystery subject.
Yes.
Okay. Is there any burning question? Sure.
Hi, Xavier. Thank you for the presentation. There was too much information in the presentation. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Yeah, okay. I'm just wondering about, you had on the last slide there, Vladimir Vernadsky and the new Jacobinism. Can you just explain what that is?
Yes, the point is, what is our political condition? And I speak a lot about the context, but the important point is this one, is that how we can be citizen of the laboratory planet, where it seems that we are just objects in this system. Then I make a list of different points. I think it's very important to recreate a new Jacobinism in this laboratory planet condition. And I put 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 points. It is not a question of scale. The planet is not a question of scale. It's not a naturalist approach of the planet. And after you have this question of decolonization, you have no difference between primitive and modern. It's still over, because as I show with agriculture, you have not the farmers from the past and the engineers from the future. It's all the population at the same time, and that is different component of the laboratory planet. Then you have no separation between humans and non-humans. It's whole citizens. And then the question of animism and also industrial animism is very important in this context. And you have the question of recosmization, that With modernity, you have like a separation between the Earth and the environment, the cosmic environment, and the point is to contextualize the Earth in the global context, in the cosmic context. And after you have the question of fluidism, is to break some machines, because we need to have more possibilities to act. Then maybe we need to break some of the machines who stop the capacity to be citizens.
Thank you, Xavier. Any other question? Okay, if there are no further questions, we are going to move to Elena Sirkovic's presentation. Dr. Elena Sirkovic, you are a legal scholar currently working on your project at the University of Helsinki and the Max Planck Institute Luxembourg for International, European, and Regulatory Procedural Law, with your project entitled Anthropocentrism and Sustainability of the Earth System and Outer Space, Antares. The project aims to research complex systemic interactions between the Earth system and outer space. Your work has been funded by Kone Foundation of Finland, Arctic Avenue administered by the University of Helsinki and Stockholm University, and the Minerva Center for the Rule of Law under Extreme Conditions at the University of Haifa. You have a transdisciplinary background, and your work focuses on international public and private law, outer space law, climate law, human rights, critical theory, and philosophy, as well as sustainable design, architecture, and arts. Welcome, Elena.
Welcome, Elena. Your slides are full screen. You can start.
All right, so going back, the framework of my presentation will be, let's say, international law, although law as a discipline is such. I should also preface, and this is based on previous experiences of giving this presentation or a similar topic, that I am here presenting and working under an assumption that international law exists and that there is some kind of a functionality out there. I'm very familiar with all sorts of other questions, especially geopolitical ones and so on, with respect to, is there even such a thing as international law? But this presentation will look at what is there on paper. So it is not necessarily that I'm arguing for one thing or another, but at least in part, giving you kind of what's out there. So first, it has been now, and this is also part of this event, this understanding of what is outer space in relation to the Earth system. Is it like something that we already know? And then in the international legal context, it is always, oh, is it like the law of the sea? Is it like the oceans? Is it like the high seas, and so on? So oceans are not outer space, and also vice versa for obvious reasons, because they're just not. But also what Earth as a planet or the Earth system as such are in outer space, just by we are already, all of us right now are in so-called outer space in a manner of speaking. But in the international legal context, so historically and on paper, it is part of what we call the areas beyond the limits of national jurisdiction, or areas beyond national jurisdiction, which means that it is a space where no one single state can have jurisdiction or own anything specifically. And it is not just outer space, but there are other common spaces such as the high seas, the deep sea, or the Antarctica and the Arctic, so all the polar regions as well. And space law itself, because this is something that has to be constantly reiterated every time there is something new happening in, let's say, in the international mindset, and is then discussed under the legal framework. So outer space law is just it's a special, what they call lex specialis. It's just a special branch of international law, but it is part of general international law. So everything that we already have out there applies in the context of outer space as well. And this also includes domestic laws or the European Union, so other regions, etc. So here is one, on this slide, there is one definition that was provided by Sergio Marchisio, a space lawyer, and essentially it includes also public and private subjects who might be involved in outer space activities. So here, areas beyond national jurisdiction, just as a definition, this is a photo of the Arctic. So all the high seas, the seabed beyond the continental shelf, polar areas, and outer space. Of course, again, these are not same things as, of course, we all know physically, but they become, quote unquote, same under the law. So what are the high seas? And I am just briefly going to go through this. Again, international waters, to put it simply. And the most recent, and this is what I think might be of interest to this group, the most recent draft agreement on the so-called High Seas Treaty is focused on this area, but it is specifically focused on the sustainable use of marine biological diversity of areas beyond national jurisdiction. Just stop very briefly to ask, Ewan, has this been okay so far? Were you able to hear me? Was it? Yes. I just need some affirmation so that I'm not speaking to myself here in my room. Yeah, okay, I'll keep going. So I'll just very briefly dwell on this High Seas Treaty, just because there was quite a lot about it in the news, and it is lauded as something significant. Again, what might be significant when we're thinking about outer space, it is focused on conservation and sustainable use of marine biological diversity of areas beyond national jurisdiction, and I'll get to this later, why this is relevant or not relevant in relation to outer space. There are some, for those who might be interested, I just listed here Article 5, General Principles. They mention here all the principles which already exist in international law. So it's just that here they are summarized under this specific interest of the biodiversity in the high seas. So something like the precautionary principle or freedom for scientific research, polluter pays, all this is already there in international environmental law, in domestic and international fora. There is also a very direct mention of indigenous knowledges, but I highlighted here some of the words because they say the use of relevant, as applicable, or as appropriate, which I think reflects quite a lot of debates on the political issues surrounding this question of indigenous rights. But this is something maybe best left for discussion later. But again, so there is no blanket understanding of, let's say, indigenous knowledge is applied to, but relevant traditional knowledge. So this is just something to maybe ponder. What is outer space then? So outer space is different from the high seas or the sea, the law of the sea, for example, UNCLOS. It says that all activities in outer space are national activities. So when we're thinking about jurisdiction in other areas, if a private actor is licensed to do something, in international law, if there is a breach of something, that there has to be established attribution of what that actor did to a particular state. So if I, for instance, as a private individual, am doing something in another jurisdiction or in an area beyond national jurisdiction, if what I do ends up breaching a law, then in the process of attributing guilt or a responsibility or liability or whatever, if we want to connect that activity to a state, it has to be directly attributable to the state. In outer space, that doesn't matter because all activities are national activities. And the reason for this is the nature of what outer space exploration entailed and entails. So these are massive, very expensive activities. It's not something that you can do out of your kitchen, for example, not yet anyway. And so, and for a lot of political, security, military, other reasons, that's how it was set in the Outer Space Treaty in 1967. One thing very briefly about the high seas and the difference with outer space. One thing that is coming up nonstop right now in debates about the environment of outer space and its protection is that while it may sound silly, of course, one of the comments is, well, there is nothing alive out there. So for instance, when we talk about protecting biodiversity of the deep seas or something like that, if I talk about international environmental law, often I will get a comment, well, how does this apply? Because there is to the best of our knowledge, there's nothing alive out there. Then, of course, this is a moot point because the environment doesn't only need to have living biological organisms. We can also speak of other environments and aspects of it, but this is, I can talk about this later. So, but what is the point of the Outer Space Treaty today? It's there is a tension between what has been established in 1967, and this is on one hand the freedom of exploration, so freedom for exploration and use by all states, and then on the other hand that outer space is not subject to national appropriation by any claim. So whether we're speaking sovereignty, occupation, or any other means. And again, because of the timing and the history, 60s and 70s, of course, there was an emphasis on the nuclear weapons. So there's an absolute prohibition. So here we have the emphasis, and this again is emphasized and re-emphasized often, that the moon and other celestial bodies shall be used exclusively for peaceful purposes. Astronauts, and this is something that again is now becoming debatable, because who are they? Are they military? Are they contractors? What is an astronaut right now, depending on either working for a public or a private actor? But in OST, the definition will say shall be regarded as envoys of mankind. This has implications because, for instance, the obligation to come to rescue is there. States are responsible for national space activities, whether carried out by governmental or non-governmental entities. So when we think of something like SpaceX, it's not a country, it's not a state. So that attribution goes directly to the state. Same for liability, and also avoidance of harmful contamination of space and celestial bodies. And I wanted to also talk about the principle of due regard. Again, I hope this is not getting a bit too boring or legal, but there is such a thing. There is an obligation of due regard. And in UNCLOS, which is the UN Convention of the Law of the Sea, and we also have it in Article 9 of Outer Space Treaty, which is, it is defined in the Law of the Sea, but not Outer Space Treaty, but it doesn't matter because, as I said earlier, it exists as an obligation in international law. And it basically means the states are bound to refrain from any acts that might adversely affect the use of outer space by other stakeholders. So this means that if a state or a private actor are doing something, is it inhibiting others from, for example, doing scientific exploration? And this is one of the issues right now with the mega constellations, for instance. There is also the question of dual use of objects or space objects, and mostly in the military sense. So is something a military object or not? And this is a kind of a whole separate issue, would take a lot of time and from today's discussion. But again, they can usually and most often be used for both military and civilian purposes. And that becomes increasingly a question with respect to transparency, especially with the calls for greater transparency for sustainability. So if we're asking companies to be transparent about their satellites, about their uses and everything, often one of the comments and one of the one of the responses is there's a security problem. So again, to reinforce this, and you can just read this, it's all also out there available online. So primary thing is that these domains are not, that states may not have sovereign rights or any kind of jurisdictional, so they can't own territory. They cannot act in these areas and as they act within their jurisdiction. But of course, they can have specific uses, such as military uses. And of course, in the law of the sea, we can also have licensing for various uses, such as fishing and so on. So one of the things that I have been doing in relation to all this kind of maybe more, not to say boring, but more formal aspects of the international legal system is to try and figure out where all these different complexities that are taking place, that have always been there, of the relationship between the Earth system and its outer space, the orbit, and so on, and how all of that is or isn't reflected in the law as is. So one of the proposals, and this is increasingly also a trend in various legal communities, to speak of, let's say, adaptive law, to include more transdisciplinary theories and methods and collaborations with other disciplines, especially in the natural sciences, in order to kind of reflect this complexity of the so-called complex systems approach to the legal system. And even before we thought of outer space, there have been some calls to apply this to in the context of Earth system sciences, which is more or less, I'd say, well, if 80s are recent, it's a relatively recent discipline, but has its origins from more than about over 100 years ago in various sources, in social sciences and natural sciences and humanities. So it is just an understanding of the Earth system as an integrated system of all of its main components. And so now what I'm trying to, for instance, do in my research is also to speak of outer space in the same context. And this is very briefly a poster that we had to do at my institute, which tries to show this kind of complexity as best as possible in a 2D, on a 2D flat piece of paper. So an understanding that while we talk a lot about, for instance, of use of space technology for mitigating climate and other issues on Earth, but at the same time, we do know that space activities are causing environmental problems in the orbit and potentially beyond. So there's this kind of like a cyclical issue of positives and negatives, to put it maybe very simply. Because also launching and all that, we need even more research, I think, to understand the specifics between the atmosphere and the orbit, especially the upper atmosphere. Because that's one of the things that I'm researching right now with colleagues in other disciplines, and this is where we're still looking for experts and hunting for data, specifically the upper atmosphere and the cooling, but also because of the global warming, but also the impact of space activities on further pollution up there. So that is just an example. And as I mentioned, so yes, there are complex systems approaches. They vary, and everyone who's in the audience in social sciences, but I'm sure also in other disciplines, this is becoming a bit of a trend to try and understand things from this perspective. It's not new. It also has various origins, some in biology, some in physics. They're not necessarily the same, also computer sciences. So I will not, in the interest of time and your focus, I'm not going to dwell maybe too much on this. But again, it comes from this issue that in law, like other disciplines, for instance, like architecture, they have this certain formality in them. And so whenever we're dealing with things that are unpredictable, for example, something that we cannot predict, that's where there's a potential glitch. And in a domain such as outer space, I would argue, for instance, that there's right now quite a lot of over-determinacy as to what we can and what we will do, but how the environment is going to react, what is going to happen to humans out there or technology or whatever, it is, of course, not something that we know 100%. So how these environments and systems will react to each other and our activities, some of it we can predict, some of it we know, and yet then there are other things that we just don't know. So on that note, I will end, and I hope that you were able to hear me, that I wasn't just speaking to myself. So thank you very much for your attention.
Thank you, Elena.
Sure.
Are there any questions? Yeah.
Have there been any historical case studies where the Outer Space Treaty has actually been cited in an actual court case, either internationally or nationally, retroactively, after an act that breaches it?
Nope.
Have there been...
No.
Come here. Okay. My question is, are there any cases in which the Outer Space Treaty has been cited retroactively in an actual court case? That is, has it ever been enforced after an act that breaches it?
Not yet. I mean, it has been. There's a couple of instances of space objects. There was, I can't remember now exactly. There was a famous case in Australia and another place of issue of space objects. But it is not yet. We do not have, and that's one issue. We don't have precedent. So we don't have case precedent as we do in other areas of law anywhere. I don't even have to say international, just law. Because what the things that I'm referring to are not really, have not been of great, let's say, global significance. Like, for instance, is a rock from the moon, somebody was in the possession of it, so is it like, can it now be private property or not? We're not there yet. Like, that hasn't been really a case of significance in the international sector. Sorry, in the international law.
Thank you.
Yes, I have two questions. Is there other ontologies for outer space law, as for the river in New Zealand with Maori, where you have other ontologies that the naturalist ontology? And another question is quite near. It's is there a status of extraterrestrial beings as in the outer space law, as you have a status for future generation in German constitutional law?
I am sorry. I think I'm sorry, I didn't hear everything. So if I understood correctly, yes.
Yes, when we speak about the moon, we speak like with the scientist. When we speak about the moon, for example, we speak as with the scientist approach, with naturalist approach of the moon. Then, if you have other ontologies, what is the status of this other approach in the outer space law? You have that, for example, for river in New Zealand constitution, with the question of the Maori, how they change the status of the river in New Zealand. And we can imagine that you have the same question with the moon.
Connect to the ISEA also, as you were mentioning.
Well, I mean, this is even the case, the New Zealand case specifically declared the Maori to be the stewards of the river. So there is a whole other, the kind of rights of nature, I don't know what to call it, rights of nature movement, let's say, in law and elsewhere, is already now being not questioned, but is also getting additional questions as to what of agency. And that goes to your question about ontology. And I can talk about this for a very long time because the very, even the word ontology, there is, if maybe the best thing for that question, I can actually give a name of a colleague from Canada who's a Canadian Indigenous scholar, Zoe Todd, and she has written extensively on marine biodiversity, on fisheries, but also on the concept of ontology and the problem even of using that concept, because it's become a little bit of, there's this quick reference to Indigenous peoples and alternative ontologies, but also in a very blanket and uniform sense, just like there are the French, Germans, Russians, Chinese, whatever. It's just in Canada, we have as many nations and approaches and languages and so on. So for instance, what might be the Maori way may not be exactly the same in, I don't know, parts of British Columbia in Canada or Siberia, for example, or whatever. So there is that thing. What, alternative, there is a pluralism out there with respect to human understanding of our lives and our surroundings, historically speaking. But what is relevant, let's say legally, is that first of all, there is a declaration of Indigenous rights in international law. And I can only speak about Canada, I can't speak of other countries, but Canadian constitutional law requires consultation with Indigenous peoples because they signed treaties with them historically, and these are active. Like this is an actual law. So it's not, like a normative proposal or anything. It is constitutional law and constitutional obligation for the Crown. So for instance, since Canada signed the Artemis Accords, there are questions precisely about the moon and what is the moon for various Canadian Indigenous peoples. So exactly your question. And in that particular case, and this is relevant to the previous question as well, it is something that has to be done. Legal interpretation has to start. We don't have the precedent, but if I can just say one thing, in relation to the outer space sector, it is very reminiscent of, at least to me, for someone, I've studied a lot the mining industry and the history of the mining industry going back to, I don't know what century. So when you think of the end of the 19th century, early 20th century, and the kind of gold rush, Klondike, all that, and the robber baron types. So we're having a bit of that happening with the idea that somehow it is the new world. It is something that's out there for everyone to take, that nothing applies, it's completely new. But that's not the case. If Canada, and again, I can only speak about Canada because that's the law that I know the best, and also I, as a citizen, I have some maybe responsibility. But by the virtue of, let's say, Canada doing something on the moon, and having its even, let's say, public and private or military sector doing something on the moon, Canadian law, as well as all international law that applies to Canada, applies on the moon, if that makes sense. So I cannot, let's say, murder somebody on the moon or blow up the moon simply because I wouldn't be able to do that in the high seas or the deep seas. So just because something is understood as the common heritage or something like that, or a res communis that belongs to all, it doesn't mean that we can blow it up. So I argue that, yes, the law applies, it just has yet to be interpreted.
Thank you, Elena. Is there any other question? No? So thank you very much, Elena.